ClancyPasta presents A Night Full of Visits, written by SpeedbirdFinal. If anyone ever reads this, I pity you. What I have seen and heard tonight will haunt me for the rest of my life if I make it out of this alive. I hope that by reading this, it will not find you. If you choose to continue, then I should explain how I came to find myself here. 3 weeks ago, I moved into my new apartment in a block of flats 6 stories high and, more importantly, only about a 10-minute walk from campus. The view is brilliant, me being on the top floor and all, and it's generally quiet and peaceful. Not too expensive, either, although it would have been cheaper to find a shared space. How I wish I had done that now. Nevertheless, I was prepared to pay a premium for the peace of mind that went with living alone. At first, things were exactly as I expected them to be, and I slowly began turning my little space into a home. It's not huge. One fairly large room that serves as bedroom, dining space, and office, as well as a little kitchen and an even smaller bathroom. For me, it was perfect. A few days ago, one sunny Saturday afternoon, I was spending the weekend in a typical fashion, wasting time, not really going out anywhere. As I said, I favored the peace of mind that went with being alone, and just generally mooching around the place. I had previously bought a little door cam that doubled as a bell. You know, one of those little fancy-looking gadgets that allows you to see who's calling at your door. It helped since my front door didn't have a peephole, and I didn't enjoy having to guess who was knocking on the door. The camera's live feed was connected to a small monitor I had placed on my very cluttered desk, allowing me to check immediately who it was if the doorbell suddenly rang, and that was how the neat little arrangement stood until tonight. It had been raining all day, and I arrived home late and in a foul mood, wanting nothing more than to kick back and forget the tediousness that I had been through. With that plan firmly in mind, I hung up my wet clothes, changed into some dry ones, and prepared a dinner that consisted of half-cooked noodles and a dubious-looking packet of hot sauce. With that, I collapsed into the worn sofa, which I was sure would also collapse one day, and flicked through the TV channels idly, not caring what I watched, as long as it improved my mood. The doorbell rang almost exactly an hour later. By this point, I had dozed off, and was in that state of half-sleep where everything seemed blurry and faded. It took 3 musical chimes for me to realize that it was the door. I slouched off the sofa, wondering who could possibly want to visit me at this time of night, and my eyes wandered over to the monitor, checking who it was. I saw that it was one of my friends, who by now looked fairly impatient. He pressed again, and the same chime rang out. Sighing, I headed over to the door. Right at that fateful moment, my phone, sitting silently on my desk, buzzed into life, pulsing with light. I don't know what prompted me to lean over and pick up my phone first, but I know now that doing so surely saved my life. I don't believe in coincidences. I still don't, and I tell myself now, when I am shivering here in the dark, that someone was watching over me when that phone rang. In the same way that my life was saved earlier, I could once again be delivered from this nightmare. It gives me hope, when surely there is none. When that phone rang, the caller wasn't someone I was expecting to hear from. It was Jim, the very same friend who now stood outside my door. A smile crept onto my face, and finding the opportunity to aggravate him further, I decided to answer the phone first. As soon as I picked up, he began speaking. "Matt, my man, why is it taking you so long to answer?" "Answer what?" I said slyly, heading back to the sofa, intending to play this out as long as I could. I knew that Jim had a pretty short temper. "The phone, what else?" he huffed, indignant. "Listen, I just wanted to ask whether you'd be down for a get-together with a bunch of other people tomorrow night. You know, just to have a bite, maybe check out that new bowling place they opened in town. 6 of us, as long as Charlie doesn't bail out as he usually does." I was chuckling by this point. "Are you really that impatient? You could have literally come inside and then told me this." I had been facing the sofa, away from the desk and the door. Now, I turned back, my eye catching the monitor, and froze. I could hear Jim on the line, but his voice seemed to fade out, the ringing in my ears and the thump of my heart blocking out the noise. He was still there, stood motionless, his eyes raised to the ceiling in frustration. But although I could hear his voice on the phone now, on the monitor, he wasn't speaking. He didn't even have a phone in his hand. With the shock of that realization came another. It was still raining heavily outside. I could hear the pitter-patter on the window, but he was utterly dry. He didn't even have a jacket on. Of course, he could have taken a taxi here or ridden the bus, but it wasn't that far of a journey, and Jim usually cycled everywhere. I picked up the phone again and clutched it to my ear. The urgent tone in my voice immediately cut off whatever he was saying. Jim, I'm going to ask you a question right now, and please answer me seriously. Where are you right now? He snorted. Whoa, you creep, he said, and I could hear the mocking tone in his voice. What do you want to know for? He must have felt bad for ignoring what I had told him, because he added, I'm at home. I felt faint. Still believing this was some sick joke of his, I continued. Jim, you're not waiting outside right now? This isn't the time for pranks, seriously. He replied in the negative, adding a sideways insult in my intelligence for good measure. I hung up on him. Suddenly aware of how much noise I was making, I put the phone back down carefully and sat on the sofa, feeling thoroughly sick by now. I felt like I was going to have a heart attack. Surely, there would be a rational explanation, but I couldn't think of one. I sat there, huddled where I was, for a long time. At first, all was silent. Then the door began ringing again, at first periodically, then almost constantly, that same wretched chime echoing over and over and over again. Whoever, whatever it was, began to knock too, hammering the door with violent blows. I murmured a prayer, by now literally sobbing with fear, when the noise suddenly disappeared altogether. My eyes still fixed to the monitor, vision blurred with tears, I watched as Jim, or not Jim, turned and walked away. The next few hours were agony. It was almost midnight by now. I first checked the monitor, switching it off and on to see if there had been some sort of crazy malfunction. I didn't dare check the camera outside. I didn't even dare approach the door, having this terrible fear that as soon as I touched it, whatever was on the other side would come crashing through. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't turn out the lights. I couldn't do anything, just sit and wait, hoping that with morning I would somehow wake up in bed, jolted from a terrible nightmare. Time itself seemed to move agonizingly slowly. More than once, I considered calling someone, a friend, even the police. But I knew I wouldn't be able to tell them anything. I had no proof, nothing to convince them that I wasn't insane. For that matter, I couldn't even convince myself that I wasn't insane. I got another visitor before long. Darkness still permeated the sky outside, and the streets below were utterly deserted. My eyes were still glued to the screen, waiting for the inevitable point where Jim would come back. It wasn't him this time, though. This time, it was worse. A pretty woman walked into the camera's field of view, coming around the corner from the corridor, and stood in front of the door. She had a faint smile on her face as she reached for the doorbell. I knew who she was. Carla, another colleague of mine, and someone who I had had a pretty major crush on a few months back. Only problem is, Carla moved to another city about a month ago, having been invited on a scholarship. I never thought I would see her again, and certainly not at 1 a.m. My heart skipped a beat when I heard her voice. It was muffled since it was coming through the door, but I could hear it nonetheless. The voice brought back pleasant memories, though I wanted nothing more than for it to shut up right now. Maddie, it's me. I'm back, she said sweetly, and on the screen she smiled too. I knew it was her talking now, and hearing her say what she did brought me so close, oh, so close, to opening that door. I decided to come back. Life was too miserable after I left, and I realized why. You weren't there with me, and that made me understand. Open the door, Maddie. You know that this is what's right. You need to know how I feel about you. She rang the doorbell again, a little more impatiently now. I was only a foot away from the door now. Surely, I told myself, she must be real. I could hear her voice, see her face, even the shadow of her feet under the door was clear. But still, I held back, the fear that had plagued me earlier, forcing me back into the middle of the room. Remembering that I had her number on my phone, I decided to call her. I picked up the phone eagerly, trying to bring the black screen to life. Nothing happened. It was still plugged into the wall, and I knew that it should be fully charged by now. Desperation took over, and I tried everything. Still, it would not turn on. Finally, I dropped it back with a mumbled curse and sat back down. The ringing had begun to pick up again, but at least I now knew that it wasn't Carla out there. Her voice had picked up in tone now, and she was almost shouting. "Open the door, Matt. I need to talk to you. It's important. Matt, I love you. Why are you doing this to me?" I tried blocking out the terrible, terrible sound of her pleading. The ringing hadn't affected me, nor had the incessant knocking, but the sound of her pleas was so much worse, so inviting. Like everything else, though, it eventually stopped. Carla left a few minutes later, but over the next few hours, I got plenty of visits. Several more of my friends, a few total strangers, even the local baker, all of them stopped by during those long hours, some silent, some murmuring, some shouting. My mother came twice, first time telling me she had brought me a gift, the next explaining that she was feeling lonely and needed some company. My mother has been dead for 4 years. Throughout all this, all I could do was pray that it would be over soon. It's almost 4 in the morning now. 30 minutes ago, the lights went out. I gasped when it happened, then fell silent again. The only thing that was still alive was the monitor. I couldn't turn it off, no matter how hard I tried. Outside, it's still as dark as ever. If anything, I fancy that it has gotten darker, because I can't see anything at all. Not even streetlights. It's as though a black curtain has been pulled over my window, and frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if that was indeed the case. The only light comes from the screen, and the thin strip underneath the door. Now, as I speak, that too has gone dark. Only the screen remains. I know that whatever it is could easily come in. I have no doubt about that. Why it will not do so remains unclear, nor why it's after me. I can't go on like this much longer, as I write the last few words on this scrap of paper by the eerie light of a screen. Soon, I think I will take matters into my own hands. I know that I must open the door. There's no other way. The thought of facing whatever unearthly being lies on the other side of my apartment door frightens me, but there's no alternative. As I write this, I will say goodnight. God have mercy on my soul. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. I want to give a huge thanks to all of my supporters over at Patreon and YouTube memberships. Your support makes these narrations possible, and I appreciate it a ton. If you'd like to join these lovely ghouls, you can head on over to my Patreon at patreon.com/ClancyPasta, or click the join button below to become a member. And if you'd like creepy cool shirts, make sure to head on over and check out my official merch store for some awesome tees, hoodies, stickers, and more. Alright. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great night. Cheers.